Hi everyone, welcome back. Today is day 3 of our 5 days of card making, and we are making this pretty little card today with these birth month flowers on it. I'm using 140 pound cold press watercolor paper. I'm using a piece of paper that is 9 inches by 7 inches. You can do whatever size you want. I just wanted it to be long in length. And I'm using my letter sparrow paints with my butcher tray to mix the paints on. I'm using a rag that I like to use, a reusable rag that I can wash. I'm using water, obviously. And then I have my Polina Bright round brush size 0. That is my favorite. Look for a link below for a percentage off on her site. And someone in my last video told me that if you are folding watercolor paper into a card, once you get to the point where you're almost about to make the crease, you can actually apply a little bit of water to the fold so that when you fold it, the edges don't fray out like it did in the last video. So I thought we would try it, and I was pleasantly surprised with how it worked, but I had already painted this card before I learned this trick. So I just wanted to show you this trick and how well it worked, because I will definitely be doing this in the future and you should definitely try it. And I didn't use it on this card for today because I had already painted it, but I wish that I had. So the idea for this card is that you are giving this card to your mom for Mother's Day, and you are going to paint the birth flowers of her children for her. My mom has 5 children, and so I drew a line across the front of the card and I did 5 dots an inch apart. So I found the middle center dot first, and then I went along and found an inch apart until I had 5 dots. So I'm going to be starting with the middle child because they're always left out. I didn't forget you, Kelly. You're the first one. I know everyone's birth flowers are going to be different. So for this tutorial, I'm going to give you general tips on how to paint something tiny. So the middle child is born in August, and one of August's birth month flowers is the poppy. So when I'm painting really tiny, I'm starting with one color, keeping it really simple, not focusing too much on details, and then I'm moving on to the next flower because I want it to completely dry. If you have too much blending and bleeding, which you know I love, it will make it look just a jumbled mess when you're painting in tiny proportions. The fourth child, his birthday is in June. I have actually 2 siblings in June, so you'll see the second child is also June. But since every month has a couple of birth flowers, when you have multiple kids in the same month, you can switch up the flower. So for the fourth child, it's a honeysuckle. Honeysuckles are super popular in Arizona, so one of my favorite flowers. I'm painting a bright orange honeysuckle. They're all over my front yard. And then my last brother, he is born in May, and so he has a lily. Okay, so let's go over my most important tips for when you're painting small, especially flowers. So you can tell my Polina Bright round brush size 0 is still pretty big compared to how tiny I'm painting these flowers. And I just wanted to show you that you don't have to have a really tiny brush to paint something tiny. I am using the very, very tip of my brush. I'm using tiny strokes, very light pressure, being super careful. Another tip is to stick to basic shapes and let go of some of the detail. So when I'm painting a flower that's significantly bigger than this, there's so much detail I can add. But when I'm painting a tiny honeysuckle, it's really just a funky triangle with jagged edges, and that's it. Or when I'm painting a poppy, it's just some bumpy strokes around an open center where a black circle is going to end up. So we don't need a whole lot of specificness. We just want the general idea of what it is that you're painting. So this especially comes into play when you're painting the greenery, because it doesn't need to be an exact obvious thing. It just needs your brain to believe what it is. So for the honeysuckle leaves, they're really jagged and bumpy, and so I created that feeling of those leaves by kind of doing these individual groupings of leaves, and you kind of get the sense that there's a bunch of really frilly, fluffy, circular edged leaves there. My next tip is to use very minimal amounts of water. You don't want washes in this situation. You don't want big beads of watercolor that spread and blend. You want not a dry brush, but you want it highly pigmented with more of a damp brush than a wet brush, if that makes sense. So whenever I feel like there's too much water on my brush, that the pigment is too much of a wash, I will just tap onto my paper towel and I can pick up more paint, and it makes it more of a damp brush than a wet brush. When I'm going in and adding details, it's the tiniest little stroke. It's almost not even a paint stroke, it's just a little mark with the very tip of my brush, but it keeps it so light and fine, and the details are what make tiny paintings so stunning, because it's just like, wow, how did you get that tiny little detail on that tiny painting? That is so awesome. The reason I started with the middle flower and worked to the right is I wanted to make sure that the middle flower set the precedent for the height. I didn't want to start on the left and then somehow get really big as I went farther along down the line, or really small. So the middle one set the height, and then I wanted to continue to go to the right so that I didn't touch the flower that I had just painted in the middle with my hand, since I'm right-handed. And now that all of those flowers are dry, I'm going back to child number 2, which is my sister, and she is also a June birthday. June is also a rose birth month flower, which I thought was perfect for my sister. And the rose was so fun to do tiny because it's literally just the tiniest little half circle strokes. And once you do that light color, you can go in and add the darker pigment, and it really makes it look like a rose. So fun and easy. I hope you have a rose on your birth flower for your card, because it was super fun. And if you don't, you should just go paint a bunch of tiny roses because it was fun. Another thing I tried to do is have similar volume in the leaves with each flower, but also vary the volume. So with the poppy, it was quite heavy on the right side, so I made the rose heavier on the left side, if that makes sense. And last but not least is me, and April is my birth month, and April has daisies for its birth flower, one of the birth flowers, and I love daisies. And I picked daisy also because it added the opportunity to have yellow on this card, because I love yellow daisies, and so I took that opportunity. Daisies are super easy, just a couple of really quick strokes with an open center, tiny little leaves. And again, I wanted to kind of play off the balance of how many flowers are in the honeysuckle with the daisies. That's why I did 3. And then I finished it off with a black center. It's probably closer to a black-eyed Susan than a daisy, but I thought it popped better for this card. And that is it. I think this idea works if you're an only child, if there's 3, if you're doing 15 grandchildren or something like that. How fun would it be to do as many birth flowers as you could fit on a card? And again, I am no master calligrapher, but I wrote mother across the bottom. Write whatever you want. This could be for any occasion, a birthday, Christmas, I don't know, anytime you would want to paint birth flowers. Just an idea. You could even just paint tiny flowers because they're cute and give it as a thank you card or a get well card, anything like that. So this is just a starting point for you to have your own ideas and make your own cards. But I hope you enjoyed this one. I really love this one, and I cannot wait to give this one to my mom because it actually goes really well with the gift that we are giving her this year. We can't tell you, Mom. I know you're watching. I hope you enjoyed it too. Please tag me if you try this one, and I will see you tomorrow for day 4 of our 5 days of card making.